Welcome to Lingthusiasm, a podcast that's enthusiastic about linguistics. I'm Gretchen McCulloch, and I'm here with Aleksic, better known as EtymologyNerd for his online videos and author of the book Algospeak. And today, we're getting enthusiastic about analyzing how the structure of social media sites shapes how we communicate on them. But first, some announcements. Our most recent bonus episode is our 100th bonus episode. As a celebration, we are answering your linguistics advice questions. Need help navigating whether to correct someone's grammar or copy their accent? Or how can I support my peers as they age out of having the coolest slang? We have the advice episode for you. Also, in celebration of our 100th bonus episode, we've decided to go back into the vault and revisit our very first bonus episode. This is a sweary episode about swearing that's a bit too spicy for the main feed, so now we're releasing this very first bonus episode to anyone who follows us on Patreon. Whether you're at the free or paid level, you can get this extra bonus from the vault with a new intro featuring some extra sweary facts we've learned in the intervening years. Go to patreon.com/Lingthusiasm to get access to these and many more bonus episodes. And also, if you become a patron by July 1st, 2025, you can get a special Lingthusiasm logo sticker with extra linguistics doodles on it sent to you in the mail. Hello, Adam.
Hi, Gretchen. Excited to be here.
Thank you for coming on the show. Before we get into talking a little bit more about linguistics on TikTok and other short-form videos, we're going to start with a question we ask all of our guests, which is, how did you get into linguistics?
Well, my gateway was etymology, like a lot of other people I know. It started in 10th grade. I read Mark Forsyth's excellent book, The EtymologyCon. Couldn't get enough of it. Read a bunch of other books. Started a little blog for myself called EtymologyNerd.com, and then I do like a little daily blog post on etymology, and I kind of keep that up throughout college, where I studied linguistics, and then I asked myself the question that everybody graduating with the linguistics degree asks themselves, which is, what do I do next?
Yep.
And that's when I started making short-form video.
Very, very relatable. What do I do next? So you started a TikTok channel, and the rest is history. Did you have some, growing steps along the way?
Totally. I wasn't sure if it was going to work. I felt decently confident since I'd made previous etymology infographics and had some experience in the linguistics communication space. But it was new putting yourself out there on video and learning the ins and outs of the algorithmic medium versus other forms of communication online. But over time, I made it work, and now that's the main thing, apart from the book that I also did.
That's so cool. So some of your previous experience also involved doing linguistic stuff on Reddit?
Yeah, I was posting a lot on Reddit. I made some etymology infographics, and I was posting some fun facts. And that was kind of my first foray into going viral and learning how viral communication works. Mm. Some of those principles still apply to the TikTok and short form video medium, because it's all about grabbing people's attention. It's all about knowing what will work, what is socially popular in a way that is going to go viral.
So my public linguistics, Lingcom history starts visibly with a blog on Tumblr back in the day. I know
you had the Tumblr back.
But before that, you had a year or two when I was posting a lot of linguistics links on Facebook, which was mostly to my friends, but people would come up to me and be like, oh, I saw that article you posted. It was really interesting. And so I learned a couple different sort of viral feeds, and that sort of fingertip sense that you have of oh, if I post this at this particular time on a Friday night, it's more likely that people are going to see it because they're on this thing, or it's less likely because they're doing something else.
Right.
That sort of spidey sense.
Well, early algorithms were very much like that, where it was they actually released what the code was for Reddit. It was a specific algorithm for age decay for a post over time, and you would know that if I wake up and I post in the morning, this post's going to do well. Now they've scrambled it. Now it doesn't matter really when you post. So if I post on TikTok, I could do it at 5 p.m. I could do it at 5 a.m. It's still going to be picked up by the algorithm, because what that does is it just continuously reevaluates whether users are responding to something and then pushes it to more people. So it's a completely different style of communication.
Yeah, it's really neat, because I tried to put a post up on Facebook the other day using some of the strategies that I'd used 10, 15 years ago, and it didn't work at all. So they've shifted how this stuff goes.
Yeah, I've consistently found that I can't go viral on Reddit anymore because I'm not in touch with that medium, because after around 2017, they made their algorithm private. They did what everybody else did, which is they scrambled the feeds. Now I do think you can post anytime on Reddit. I think things are a little bit different. Anyway, I have no idea what's going on there anymore. I'm not on Reddit anymore, I am tapped into social media in the short form setting.
Do you think of it as short form video or like vertical video versus horizontal video? Because I feel like the horizontal YouTube videos are an entirely different style.
I think there's absolutely something important to the vertical format that changes the medium and your perception of it. First, there's the fact that it dominates the entire screen and kind of consumes all of your attention. The same way when you're watching a movie versus watching a play, when you're watching a play, you see the behind the scenes machinations, you're reminded of the fact that you're watching a play. When you're watching a movie, you can get sucked into the movie. I think long form video, you still know you're watching a video and you're still aware you're watching the YouTube medium. Sometimes when you're in short form video and the screen is dominating your entire consciousness and your phone's in your hand and you're lying on the side of your bed looking at your doom scrolling videos, you actually forget that you're watching a video, and that just becomes the totality of your consciousness, which is kind of a crazy difference in perception. And also there's something to how you can immediately scroll and the next video is another dopamine hit. So that changes the nature of how these videos get presented to you on the creator side, because we know that there's more scarcity for your attention.
So maybe you can walk us through a little bit of, like, you know, we don't have the constraints of like trying to make a 1 minute video for social media.
Thankfully.
So when you're, thankfully, podcast, completely different format. I mean, we do have the constraints of like, you can't use graphics on a podcast, which changes how we talk about things. And so I think like every medium is going to have its own type of constraints. So maybe you can walk us through like, what are the steps that you go from like, I have an idea, make a cool video, to now this video is online and people are commenting on it?
Yeah, it's not a quick process at all, even though it's like I end up with a 1 minute video. In fact, it takes me a few hours to come up with a topic I find compelling, research it, try to really make sure I'm presenting it accurately, and then script it out in a way that's maximally interesting to my audience, because if it's not, people are going to scroll. So I have to very carefully script, thinking about how I'm going to retain attention throughout the entire video. And then I film it and edit it down so that it's, again, as engaging as possible, so you're not going to scroll away. And finally, I post it into the void and hope that it does well.
Let's start with that first step of coming up with topics. Are there some topics that you're like, oh, this does really well, I know this is going to do really well, or like, I love this topic, but I'm going to do it even though I know it won't do as well?
Absolutely. And I think you have to be faithful to yourself when you're communicating, because if it's not fun for you, it's not going to be fun. So I try to balance topics that I know are going to go viral with topics that are personally engaging to me. Oftentimes those are similar. I'm very interested in internet slang, for example, and I know that's trendy. So talking about internet slang usually does well. But sometimes I want to do a video on the etymology of chairs, and I do a video on the etymology of chairs. And I know that's not going to do as well, but it's a little one for me, or for the devoted fans. But yeah, you do have to be aware of the trends. You have to play into online memes. You have to be aware of the ongoing discourse and the culture of the platforms that you're posting in.
What's an example of a trend that you've jumped on recently?
Back when internet's, the Rizzler song came out, that's, words like Riz, Gyat, Skibbity, I was covering those and nobody else was talking about those at the time, and those each got like millions of views because those words were trending at the time. And I think an important feature of the online ecosystem is that words are metadata. That a word like Skibbity is something that's analyzed by the algorithm, and that the algorithm pushes trends, from trending audios to trending hashtags to trending words. And when the algorithm sees the word Skibbity, it's going to push to people that are interested in the word Skibbity, which are interested in it because creators are making videos about that, and we're making videos about that because the algorithm is pushing those videos. So we're in this kind of cycle of words being metadata. And I made videos on, for example, the etymology of Skibbity that got millions of views simply because it was a trending thing at the time. And so you can't really separate online language change right now from words that are trending.
Yeah, it's just part of where language is going. I remember when Skibbity came up at the American Dialect Society Word of the Year, which is how I find out about a lot of the new slang, because, the American Dialect Society Word of the Year vote, which happens every year in January, is a room of a bunch of linguists and, some lexicographers and people like that. And also, the occasional person who just happened to be there who sort of nominate from the floor words of the year and then also vote on them. And what happens every year, which is really fun, is some like undergrad or occasionally someone's like kid who's like a high school student will show up for the very first time and realize that all of these grown-ups don't know what the heck we're talking about, and that they hold the keys to what the young people know. And they'll be like, I have to represent my young people. I need to get up with this microphone like several times and be like, you guys need to pay attention to Skibbity, so Skibbity doesn't really quite have a meaning. It's just one of these syllables that people say.
It's a nonsense word and interjection that's just meant to be funny. It can be used as an intensifier, so you can say Skibbity Riz to describe Riz of extreme quality, either good or bad. It can be used in that capacity, or it can just be used as a nonsense word.
And Riz comes from charisma, so it's used for like the latest cool word that means cool, sort of.
Yeah. It's just Riz is like exactly, charisma. And these words have been trending as so-called brain rot. I don't think there's actually anything about them that rots your brain, but they're called brain rot, and they're encapsulated in this brain rot meme genre of repeating trending slang words. And that's something we've been seeing since 2023, and there's a lot of new brain rot always emerging.
I remember when I was first pitching Because Internet to publishers, the trendy word that everyone wanted me to talk about, which I did not actually talk about very much in Because Internet, was fleek and on fleek. And this was like both the trendy word that younger people were using and also the word that the media had decided to pick up out of the words the young people were using and like keep decontextualizing and putting in ad campaigns because it was sort of like one of those weird young people words, when there can actually be words that young people are using that don't come across to grown-up media people as exciting as something like skibbity, which has this sort of, flavor to it.
Absolutely. I think a big thing that keeps coming up, both in terms of online brain rot humor and in terms of our popular discussion of words, is what we call obtrusivity, when a word sticks out. And the word yeet, or
that's another one.
On fleek and yeet came out around the same time as the words selfie or cancel for cancel someone online. And yet we didn't think of selfie and cancel as slang words, even though they were. And they evolved from the same cultural moment, but they became a normal part of language, whereas I would say yeet and on fleek died out. And that's probably because they stuck out too much, were thought of as too generational slang, and then didn't stick. And I think probably a similar thing is going to happen with a lot of brain rot words. Some of them could stick around, though.
Yeah. Sometimes a word like okay is this like 100-plus-year-old word that started as a language fad.
It was just a meme in 1840s newspapers.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That stood for all correct, but spelled OLLKORRECT. And there were a whole bunch of other ones at the time, and none of them stuck around.
Yeah, so there was a bunch of other, like, there's NC or something. Yeah. There was, like, a bunch of other Boston newspaper acronyms that just didn't stick. And that's the thing. Language often comes in the form of memes. And sometimes they're tied to the lifespan of memes. And they're going to die out when the meme dies out. But sometimes they're going to fill a lexical gap. They're going to fill this niche in language that we need to have a word for. And then it sticks around.
I think of this, too, with, like, internet acronyms like LOL, LOL, and OMG, stuff like that. And when I was young, and the hot new craze that people were panicking about young people using was internet acronyms. And you'd see them publish these long lists of internet acronyms. And the first couple would always be stuff like LOL, OMG, WTF, that kind of thing, like stuff you've seen, BTW. And then they would just get longer and longer, and you'd be like, is anyone using the acronyms on the bottom half of this list?
Yeah.
Not really. And those have not stuck around. Like, no one's talking about rafflecopters anymore.
No. Sometimes the acronyms get lexicalized. That is, they become words in popular usage. And actually, it was sort of a meme trend from January to March of this year, 2025, where people are repeating the acronyms ICL, PMO as kind of brain rot acronyms. And they're repeating it simply for the purpose of satirizing the fact that acronyms, absurd sometimes, can become popular.
ICL, PMO. I don't know this one.
It's ICLTSPMO, which means I can't lie, this shit pisses me off. And people are using that online as like a sort of acronym brain rot. But it's because it seems a little foreign, a little obtrusive at the start that it's even compelling.
Yeah, it's sort of like an ironic acronym that doesn't seem like it should be one of the real ones.
Right, yeah.
That's great. But also, like, only some of them stick around and have staying power. I had a really hard time with when Because Internet came out, everyone wanted me to be making the claim that language was changing faster than ever before. And I was like, look, I would love someone to have done this analysis. But first of all, we need to quantify what we mean by language change. And secondly, we need someone to actually do a comparative study across every decade for the last couple hundred years. And thirdly, like, yes, a word can become popular faster than ever before because people can pass it around without media as intermediaries. But then it can die just as fast. So, like, what do we mean by change if it hasn't actually changed the language 10 years later because everyone's forgotten about fleek or skibbity or something like that?
Yeah, you've got to define all those things like popularity. I totally agree. And in that sense, people are always coming up with new words, even for their own, like, familect, the dialect you speak at home, you probably come up with words. Everybody's coming up with words all the time. I think what people mean when they ask that question, though, is probably about, is there more broadly popular slang that most people online are aware of happening faster? I do think the answer to that one is yes, because the TikTok and social media short form ecosystem brings viral memes to the forefront a lot faster. They have a lot of time to stew in little niche in-group communities and then blow up beyond that. I think we're having a surge of broad slang that more people are aware of, probably. But again, it's very hard to do some kind of like quantifiable, data-driven analysis on that, because how do you even, go about finding the data points?
This is my call out for any academics listening to this of like, please someone do this study. I'd be very interested to see this result, because like there's an intuitive sense around it, but how much is words becoming popular in my ecosystem, or how much is words like having a staying power? One of the things that I enjoyed about your book, AlgoSpeak, was you talked about this sort of structure of how you go about writing a script for a video and the attention-grabbing tactics that you use in terms of, getting people's attention, having them not click away or scroll away within that first couple seconds. Do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Absolutely. Attention is the most important thing in the online medium. 50% of your viewers will scroll away in the first second of the video. And over time, your retention rate, that's how long people are watching the video, is going to drop more and more unless you keep engaging your audience. And the TikTok algorithm sees that. You see it too as a creator. You have like video analytics that tell you when people stop watching. But the TikTok algorithm continuously reevaluates whether people are paying attention to your video, and it only pushes it to new audiences if people are still paying attention. So it's not like broadcast media. So a podcast, for example, literally comes from iPod plus broadcast, where everybody tuning into this podcast hears our message. There's no virality to it. In algorithmic media, which is a completely different style of communication, your message reaches a few people initially and then only spreads beyond that if it has some broader compelling factor. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in the jail of 300 views on all your videos. So that means you have to get attention to some degree. You can't avoid that fact. And that means you sort of have to play into the contentification or entertainment factor of social media, where anything educational also needs to be entertaining to some degree. I need to script out viral hooks. I need to use little micro hooks throughout my videos to keep people engaged. I use a different accent in the social media medium because I know that'll keep my audience more engaged.
How would you describe the difference in that accent?
I'll stress more words to keep you entertained. I'll probably speak a little bit faster because then people either have to rewind, which is good for engagement, or they'll comment on how fast I'm speaking, which is good for engagement. It just seems to be a good thing to speak faster.
So in some cases, being less understandable makes people comment on it to try to understand you?
Yeah. Anything that generates comments is good. So that's unfortunately means that sometimes videos that aren't actually good for you go viral, like rage bait, clickbait, stuff that just generates comments and people hate watch it, it still goes viral. So a lot of online stuff is that. It's important to remember that these algorithms are not actually for you. They're for maximizing your engagement online, which is a different thing than actually what you want to see. And sometimes they'll push stuff that is simply stuff that will get clicks and attention from you.
So you had a couple examples of sort of templates that you use to create those hooks or to create that sort of intention from the first place, like one of my favorite this or something like that.
Yeah, I think you kind of have to use superlatives. So I'll say my favorite thing about this is that, or this is the best something, or this is the most interesting thing about that. Because if you just say, oh, this is one thing that's sort of interesting, people will scroll away because the next video underneath you is going to have the most interesting of something. So you need to have the most interesting of something to keep that audience engaged. And if you don't, people are going to scroll.
It feels to me like, you go to a pizza shop and they're like, world's best pizza. And I'm like, I don't think you actually did a survey of all the pizza shops in the world. I think you're just making this claim because like probably you have pretty good pizza.
Exactly. I think that's a good analogy. It's important to note that these attentional tactics and everything else I'm talking about is not actually something that's new. It's always been a thing that humans need attention in order to do something. It's just a little compounded in the algorithmic medium, I would say, where attention is more important because of that ability that you have to scroll and find a more engaging video. So attentional tactics are always there. Whether you write a journalistic article, you need a hook. Whether you start a podcast, you need an intro. You're always going to need attention. But it's just more important in algorithmic communication.
Yeah, I think as somebody who makes a podcast and does not especially make TikTok videos or videos for any of the algorithmic sites, I think that podcasts feel a little bit different to me because, like, on the one hand, we don't have any episodes that go viral. Like, viral episodes doesn't really exist for podcasts and for podcasting as a medium. But on the other hand, any episode of Lingthusiasm could be someone's very first episode. Like, they may never have listened before, and so there's a certain amount of context that we need to set. But on the other hand, when people get into Lingthusiasm and they're like, oh, this podcast sounds cool, they very often go back and listen from the very beginning, or in the other direction, they'll listen to a whole lot of episodes. So we have very similar amounts of listens across different episodes, which is not something that I've seen on online video creators, where you'll have like a few very viral videos and then others that sort of sink maybe without a trace, or get that like 300. So 300 is approximately the number of viewers that TikTok shows a video to decide whether more people are going to watch it.
Yeah, you start with like 300 views, then you send it to the next round, and then you pass like 2,000 views or something. There's like cycles to how it perpetuates things. I do think sometimes, people go through your profile and look at things, but I absolutely agree that short form video is a completely different medium in that it's much more fragmentary in how you perceive it. Each video is disjointed, presented separately from the others, and you often don't go onto individual creators' profiles. There's less of a personal connection with the audience, which is why if you are communicating online, you do need to build a personal brand, which is an important way to keep attention still.
Yeah, but like the flip side of it is you also have podcasts that have like 0 listens or 3 listens or whatever. Like you don't have that sort of built-in 300, to see if anyone else wants to see it.
Sure. I would say 300 really means nothing. 300 just means that 300 people got the video. They might have all scrolled away.
Oh, yeah. But like when you start a podcast, you have no guaranteed starter views.
Yeah.
Like you can put up an episode and get literally 0 views.
Well, it's also, I resonate a lot more if I listen to 45 minutes of you talking than if I just watch a 1-minute explainer video from some person I've never seen before. There's much more of a personal connection in podcasting, probably.
Oh, yeah. Like for podcast listeners are very loyal, but it's also hard to get them in the first place because like for me to start listening to a new podcast is such a huge commitment.
Conversely, there's probably more parasociality with the video medium where people resonate more with the person's face. So both have their pros and cons in terms of like how an audience connects with you, but that does have like downstream implications to how you perceive the message when you're receiving it.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember switching from blogging first to podcasting, and like we got something like 3 fan emails in the first week of starting this podcast, and Lauren and I had both been blogging for like 10 years before that and had gotten like maybe 1 to 3 fan emails combined over the previous 10 years because suddenly people could hear our voices and they were like, oh, this is something completely different.
Yeah, there absolutely is something more to that human connection. Maybe that's why short form video is also compelling. It is a human presenting. I mean, now we're having more and more AI, but I think we're still drawn to human production. And when we see people talk, we see their video and their audio, there's something there.
Yeah, absolutely. So you did a linguistics undergrad degree?
Yeah, I studied government and linguistics, actually, which I always find are way more connected than people expect them to be.
Oh, tell us more about the connection between government and linguistics.
Well, my parents are Serbian. My background was in researching how Serbo-Croatian language policy affects language identity, and the takeaway there was that Croatians are more polarized about their language identity than Serbians are. Huh. But that still has sent me down this rabbit hole today where I can't separate how certain restrictions affect your language. For example, there's government restrictions on what can be said in certain countries. In China, you can't say the word censorship on the internet because that's censored. So people say stuff like harmonious, which was an allusion to the CCP's goal of a harmonious society. And then the Chinese government started censoring that too. And then people started saying river crab because that sounds similar to the word harmonious, but then that started being censored, so people started saying aquatic product instead of river crab. So the government censorship is actually affecting people's language in real time. And this is happening on US platforms too. There's no direct government censorship of free speech, but there is like Section 230 of the Communications Act of 1934, which says that the platforms have complete control over what we can say. So that means that we're subjected to platform terms of service. I can't say kill on TikTok, for example, but I can say unalive. So some people have started saying that as a form of algo speech meant to evade algorithmic censorship.
That makes sense. So do you feel like your background in linguistics makes you want to analyze the interplay of how people are communicating with the algorithm more?
Absolutely. I think both on the government side and the linguistic side, there is some sociological thing that's really interesting to me here. It's how we connect with one another, both on a government level and a linguistics level, right? And the whole goal of online communication is hopefully connecting with a creator on the viewer end or connecting with your viewers on the creator end. And that means that sometimes we use language in a way that we can connect to more people. Sometimes that means using euphemisms like unalive. And sometimes that means using more attention-grabbing language, which I think is evolving at the same time as words in general.
So you started doing all these TikTok videos. You have, very successful following on TikTok. And then you started working on a book about algo speak. which should be out shortly after this episode airs. So if you're listening from the future, it should be out already. And how is that shift from writing scripts for 1-minute videos to writing a much, much longer form and much less multimedia and all of these things? What was that shift like for you?
It was a little relieving, honestly. I feel like I had this academic urge that wasn't being satisfied with the TikTok videos. And it was really nice to be able to get my more nuanced thoughts out, because it's really frustrating that TikTok makes you present things as cohesive stories, cohesive narratives, which is, if it's not presented as one linear point A to point B story, it's not going to go viral because it's too complicated for viewers, unfortunately.
But it's like, you've got to present that all in a minute.
Yeah, that too. You got to do it quickly. You got to do it without nuance. And that means you often leave out important details. And etymology is often a very messy thing where it's not actually point A to point B, but, word C influenced how the spelling of word A changed to word B, right? Even though it wasn't related.
Totally.
Stuff like that, where you can't really add in that nuance. And it's nice to also mix short form and long form media, where long form you can give kind of detail to your thoughts.
I remember when I was writing Because Internet, I had to learn how to write without hyperlinks.
Yeah, that's a pain for me too.
It's so hard. Because I'd gotten so used to writing for like internet places, whether for my blog or like somewhere like Wired or something, and I like write an article. And if I'm using a word that I don't know if people are going to know what it means, I can just hyperlink it to like a Wikipedia article, and then I don't have to worry about it. Which was...
I mostly had to learn to write less academic, because my background, again, was in researching the Serbo Croatian language, and I was writing for like my 4 thesis advisors. So I'm used to like communicating informally on algorithmic media, but I had to kind of adapt, kind of combine my academic writing with my informality online and turn that into a popular linguistics book.
Yeah, that makes sense. Writing without hyperlinks was so weird, because you have to, like, when I'm writing for like a blog or an article for somewhere, I have sort of an imagined audience of like, who am I imagining reading this based on the readership of an existing platform? Whereas before you write a book, you don't know who's going to actually read that book. Like, who am I imagining reading this?
Really? I would say there's a greater mismatch on short form video. I have sort of an idea who my book audience is. I have a sort of an idea. There's going to be people who are young who are interested in slang. There's going to be people who are old who are interested in what's up with the internet right now.
And what are the youth doing? Yeah.
Yeah. When I make a video on short form media, I actually have no idea who that's going to be sent to, because the algorithm is going to intercept it, reevaluate what it thinks that message is, which may not be what the actual message is or what my intent was, and then send it to an audience that's going to maximize engagement, not necessarily, again, the audience that I wanted. So here's an example. Let's say I'm a left-wing social media political activist creating videos on TikTok, and I'm stitching, like kind of creating a response to a right-wing video. I intend for my stitch to be a rebuttal kind of to the original right-wing video and to be sent to that audience. But no, the algorithm is not going to do that. It's going to reinterpret it as a left-wing video, send it to a different left-wing audience. And now everybody feels happy because they're in their social media echo chambers, and that kind of probably contributes to the hyperpolarization we're seeing today.
So you think, okay, well, a book, like, at least I have some level of control over that audience.
Yeah. And at least the audience kind of probably has a feel that I'm writing a book for them. I think there's a phenomenon on social media. It's called context collapse. You see the video on the For You page. It's called For You. But I may not have made that video for you. I usually don't think that much about. I just kind of create videos that I think are interesting and send them out into the void, and then they're perceived. And it may not have been for you. I'm sorry. But the book was probably meant for my target readership.
I love the book where Dana Boyd coined this concept of content collapse, because it's called It's Complicated, The Social Lives of Network Teens. And she went around and did, for her dissertation, like hundreds of sociological interviews with teenagers over the course of like 10 years. So she starts with MySpace and ends up at Instagram, because she has this exact period when parts of it are, you know, what we think of as modern social media.
Parts moment of transition. That's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. But she just captures this period between MySpace, which is really old school, to Instagram, which is like still around. People are still using it, and has all of these themes that come up from like what teenagers are doing, how they're interacting with each other, with their parents, and all of this sort of stuff. And it was a huge influence when I was writing Because Internet, that I was like, I can't go do 10 years of, you know, detailed ethnographic interviews, because I don't have that kind of book. Like, this isn't, you know, it used to be a PhD dissertation, but the respect that she treats her interview subjects, and like, okay, why are people doing what they are doing, and the sort of curiosity that she brings to people's practices, and the fact that it felt like her findings still applied, even though obviously some of the social media sites that she was writing about were defunct by the time she was writing about them.
Yeah, that's so important. And I think there's often a tendency to write off new language as brain rot. And kind of one thing I was hoping with my book is I know a lot of the slang is going to be outdated once the book comes out, and maybe even some platforms are going to be gone. Who knows?
That's inevitable. It just happens. Yeah.
But the trend is about algorithmic media shaping our language. And I do think we're kind of at this new cultural linguistic inflection point where we're in a different medium and it's shaping how we speak in a new way. Each platform has its own ways of shaping our communication. And the context collapse thing can be really interesting when you consider the age of different things on social media. You might see a Tumblr screenshot on Instagram today that was actually written in like 2013. And it was written for a different time period. It was written for a different cultural like audience. And now you're perceiving it now, which you weren't the audience for that. But you're going to think that you were because it was in your home page of your Reels tab or something.
The initial context in which she has context collapse, which I find so funny because it was a period that I lived through, but also is not quite what's going on right now, was when there was this period of like Facebook being like the cool thing that the young people were using, you know, university students, high school students. And then there was a few years later, the second period when everyone's parents joined Facebook.
Yeah.
And so instead of suddenly like sending this message that's just to your friends who are all your age, which was my first experience with Facebook, you're now sending this message and your aunt or something is commenting on it like, oh, it's so nice to see you having such a good time. Or possibly worse if you're like posting photos from being at a party or something that aren't necessarily something you want your parents to see, maybe. And so having this collapsed context because people's imagined audience has suddenly shifted even within the same feed. And then this additional thing of like, once you get a sort of viral object on social media, it goes viral across different platforms. Like, I don't use Reddit very much, but I see Reddit screenshots all over the place. When something says something funny on Reddit, it just gets passed around. That being passed around and like uprooted from its original context and replanted elsewhere.
Yeah, I think I joined Facebook right on the cusp of that moment of transition. So maybe the 2 years before me were like the pre-parent era, and I joined maybe slightly more in the parent era, but I could see like just by knowing the people 2 years older than me that this was like a difference that occurred. It's super interesting. And the reason I referred to social media as the void earlier is that once you send it out, it's out there. And that's, if your parents ever warned you about like, you know, putting stuff out on the internet, that's true. It's once it's out there, and you can't control where it's going. You can't control who repurposes your message. So I guess you should be very deliberate about how you communicate.
And also, like, there is a saying that the internet is forever, and yet there's also so much like link rot of like, oh, this link used to work, and then they've stopped paying for the hosting of that site, and now the site is down, and, you know, how are we supposed to see it? Like, because internet has a lot of stuff about Twitter, it's not called that. The Twitter links may or may not work in a few years because that's not something that happens now.
And a lot of Vine videos are gone.
Yep.
Anytime, like, 4chan, for example, is a source of like 50% of all memes from like 2010 to 2016, and all their like stuff on 4chan decays after one day. So you have no idea like where a lot of memes come from.
Yeah.
So you're sort of in this etymological paradox where it's so abundant and so full of information that you can draw from and do so much amazing analysis. But at the same time, stuff disappears. And there's also so much to weed through that it's kind of harder to do research in another way. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially with video where like text can sort of get archived, like Internet Archive is pretty good at text. Whereas I don't think they do a lot of ingesting of video or multimedia because it's much more storage space. But on the other hand, like,
I mean, that's data intensive. Yeah.
Where is that sort of supposed to go? Like the stuff that you want to erase from the internet is still on there, and the stuff you want to preserve isn't necessarily on there.
Yeah, I've seen it referred to as a digital dark age. There's terabytes of information being uploaded to the internet every day that's never seen by anyone, never will be. You know, some stuff that's just going to be forgotten. It's kind of mind-boggling to take in.
And also, a lot of digital formats aren't particularly good at the archiving thing. So, like, a book, like, you have it on your shelf, you can rediscover a book in, like, the attic 100 years later, and the pages will still open, you know? Whereas, like, a CD that's 100 years old, it doesn't read anymore. A CD that's 30 years old is beginning to be the end of its lifespan.
Yeah, that's one reason that I was drawn to write a book. I've been getting into the theories of Harold Innis recently, a Canadian communications scholar, and he differentiates between time-biased media and space-biased media.
Oh, tell us about that.
Time-biased media is media that has longevity, media that will, like, oral traditions. Think about medieval scholars like hand copying manuscripts. But it's very intensive. It's like, it's hard to communicate to a lot of people at once, and it takes a while to produce, but it stays around for a while. So I think in our modern age, a book is a good analogy, where a book, again, you can pick up a book from 1900, it's still going to be something you can read. The other kind of media is space biased, which takes up space. Think about like newspapers being created every day, social media content being created every day, and it can reach huge demographics of people. But it's like part of this cycle that it immediately becomes outdated, and then we create more of it. And so social media is very much a space biased medium, and I think Innes would definitely see it that way. Whereas a book is more on the time bias side. And I think his main argument, the reason that he laid this out, and again, this is me coming at this from a government and linguistics angle, that a well-functioning society should have a mixture of time biased and space biased media, where you can, one, communicate historical ideas, because if everything's space biased, you're going to forget about bad things in the past and then repeat those mistakes. But you also want an ability to challenge the status quo and continual kind of questioning about what's going on, and that's where space bias media is good. So I think it's best to balance.
Yeah. And you just have people who like take it on themselves to archive the space bias media, like people who create like microfiche archives of newspapers or digitized newspapers so that we can access them later, because they are also part of the historical record, even though the newsprint that they're printed on is literally so flimsy.
Right.
Or the social media site can just go down and then all the posts don't work. But like part of that was the historical record of a historical event as it was happening, a protest or some sort of big news event. You want to be able to like see that stuff.
Yeah. Turning space biased media into time biased media. That's, I guess, another hope of the book documenting this exact inflection point in language history.
Yeah, I definitely had the impression with Because Internet that I was like, okay, I'm trying to analyze now, but I'm also writing a history book.
Yeah.
Because like I read David Crystal's book about language on the internet, which was published in 2001, which is a long time ago in internet years. And it has all this stuff about like, you know, old school chat rooms and stuff like this. Usenet
and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I would say both books are very influential on me. And I also try to write my book in the past tense as much as possible, because I know it's going to be outdated. You can't, determine what's going to change.
But then you also need like, it's also a history book, because now when I read David Crystal's book, I'm not like, oh, this is so outdated, because if you read a book about the internet, like 2 or 3 years after it came out, that's the worst, because it's like claiming to be about the present, and yet it's sort of palpably not about the present. But then when you read it 10 plus years later, it's like, well, this is not about the present anymore, but now it's a historical archive of this very ephemeral era.
Some stuff still rings true. I think Because Internet now is like canonized, where the stuff you talked about with typographical tone of voice, that's still so true. That's like, or emoji use. This is all still very relevant, even if we're not using the same emojis. Emojis do evolve like words. Like we went from the laughing emoji to the crying emoji to the skull emoji to express humor online. But we're still using emojis to express humor. There's still kind of this sort of punctuation and addition to your tone of voice. So the underlying principle still really applies. And it's good that we have that time biased perspective on it.
Yeah, and I think, like, when I was writing Because Internet, I was very aware that, like, video was sort of coming, but there wasn't enough meta-reflection on it that I felt like I could include a whole chapter on it. Like, I remember thinking, I wish someone was analyzing, like, YouTube. There's so much stuff going on YouTube. And then in the time between when Because Internet was being copy-edited and when it was actually published, TikTok took off in that 6-month span. And I was like, well, okay, someone else is going to have to write this book. That's not what's going on here. I would love to see more analyses of like Zoom and like video chat communications. I tried to find stuff about Skype back in the day, but there wasn't a lot of research. And I bet a lot of people are writing those papers now.
I feel like AI is going to really be shaping our communication in ways that we can't quite pinpoint right now, but are going to be huge in 5 years. Like large language models overusing certain words, or AI generated videos are now they have the 5-fingered humans instead of the weird distorted people, and you have actual text. So it can actually stand in for real communication. And what does that mean? What is the future of how we're perceiving AI generated communication? I think it's going to have a big impact on what we're perceiving in the future, but it's really hard to pinpoint that now. And it's also such a shifting cultural moment. It's hard to tell.
I mean, stay tuned for, 5 or 10 years. We'll have a Lingthusiasm episode where we'll interview the linguist who writes that book. There's a word that AI-generated text uses a lot that humans don't use that much. I'm trying to remember what it is.
There's delve, commendable, meticulous. There's the M dash. There's a lot of it. And we've research showing that there has been like a 2,000% uptick in research papers written with the word delve in the past 3 years. Simply because people are using ChatGPT to write their research papers. So it's a little concerning, maybe. I don't know.
But I wonder if there's going to be like a backlash of even people who would have used delve before are like, oh, I can't say delve now because it's going to look like my paper is being written with AI.
I think there is. I've seen people being criticized for using the M dash because it looks like AI. And I'm an M dash enjoyer, so that's bad news for me, I guess. But
my editor had to tell me to delete so many M dashes.
I definitely think there's like an anti-AI backlash that we're really going to be seeing. And it's kind of concerning in another sense because a lot of these words, delve, commendable, meticulous, are overused because the people used to train the large language models disproportionately come from like Nigeria and Kenya, where those words actually are used at that rate. But when you look at American academia, it's not. So now people from those places are going to be targeted more for talking like AI.
Yeah, which is such an interesting, like, twist to why AI is doing that particular type of grammar, that we could learn more about how people are talking in those areas, but then they get unfairly stigmatized for sounding like an AI, even though the AI really sounds like them in the first place.
Yeah.
Adam, thank you so much. It's been great having you on the show. If you could leave people knowing one thing about linguistics, what would it be?
I think the theme to a lot of what we've been talking about today is a phrase popularized by another Canadian, Marshall McLuhan, that the medium is the message. And the way you perceive the message through a different platform, for example, really affects your understanding of it. And TikTok has a different way of sending a message than a podcast format. And all this will change how we as humans can relate to each other, which is very important to keep considering. So I would urge people to not forget that the medium is the message.
Lingthusiasm and links to all the things mentioned in this episode, go to Lingthusiasm.com. You can listen to us at all the podcast platforms or Lingthusiasm.com. You can get transcripts of every episode on Lingthusiasm.com/transcripts, and you can follow at Lingthusiasm on all the social media sites. You can get scarves with lots of linguistics patterns on them, including the International Phonetic Alphabet, branching tree diagrams, Booba and Kiki, and our favorite esoteric Unicode symbols, plus other Lingthusiasm merch, like t-shirts with Gavagai the Rabbit on them, and aesthetic IPA posters at Lingthusiasm.com/merch. Lauren's social media and blog is Superlingo, and links to my social media can be found at GretchenMcCulloch.com. My blog is allthingslinguistic.com. My book about internet language is called Because Internet. You can follow our guest, Adam Aleksic, on TikTok, Instagram, Substack as EtymologyNerd, and his book is called Algospeak. Lingthusiasm is able to keep existing thanks to the support of our patrons. If you want to get an extra Lingthusiasm episode to listen to every month, our entire archive of bonus episodes to listen to right now, or if you just want to help keep the show running ad-free, go to patreon.com/Lingthusiasm or follow the links from our website. And as a reminder, our very first bonus episode is available for free right now on Patreon if you just sign up to become a free member. Patrons can also get access to our Discord chat room to talk with other linguistics fans and be the first to find out about new merch and other announcements. Recent bonus topics include linguistics celebrities, the linguistics of kissing, and a whole episode where we give you advice on your linguistics questions. Can't afford to pledge? That's okay too. We also really appreciate if you can recommend Lingthusiasm to anyone in your life who's curious about language. Lingthusiasm is created and produced by Gretchen McCulloch and Lauren Gahn. Our senior producer is Claire Gahn. Our editorial producer is Sarah Dopierella. Our production assistant is Martha Tsui-Billins. Our editorial assistant is John Crook. And our technical editor is Leah Bellman. Our music is Ancient City by The Triangles.
Stay Lingthusiastic!